Hello there, and welcome to Whispers of Earth, where curiosity drifts at its own pace and science unfolds like an ancient story whispered through the wind. Tonight, we're not counting hours or minutes on the ticking clock of our modern world. Instead, we're reaching back into an age so deep and distant that even the word ancient feels too young to describe it. We're stepping into the Mesozoic Era, a span of time when the Earth wore a face no living creature today would recognize. It was a world before humans, before flowers, before the familiar shapes of continents. Life was reinventing itself after disaster, crafting new forms, some destined to become legends. Dinosaurs may steal the spotlight in our imagination, but they were only one note in a symphony of transformation. The seas, the skies, the forests, all of them played their parts in an age that redefined the planet. Before we journey backward, I wonder where you're listening from right now. Is it night where you are, the world outside sinking into quiet? Or is it early morning, when the first light begins to stretch across your window? There's something strange and beautiful about that, sitting in your own present moment while imagining one that lies hundreds of millions of years behind us. If you find comfort in this slow unfolding, maybe give this a like, or subscribe to join more of these tranquil explorations. It helps others find their way here, to this quiet corner of the digital world where science becomes a form of storytelling, and discovery isn't rushed, but savored. So, take a breath with me. Let's step together into the slow rhythm of time. Not with haste, but with the patience of the Earth itself. To imagine the Mesozoic, we first have to loosen our grip on what we know. Close your eyes for a moment and picture the Earth, not as it is now, but as it once was. There were no continents shaped like those on your maps, no North or South America standing apart, no Africa, Europe, or Asia as separate lands. Instead, they were bound together into one enormous supercontinent, Pangaea. In those early days, land stretched unbroken across the planet, sweeping from pole to pole, wrapped by vast oceans that seemed endless. The air smelled different, thick with volcanic gases and rich in compounds we'd find strange today. Plants breathed out chemicals that mingled with higher levels of carbon dioxide and lower levels of oxygen. Volcanoes rumbled constantly across the landscape, their eruptions painting skies red and black, shaping climates and carving new landforms. Across those lands crept forests of strange conifers and cycads, tough, waxy trees that could endure heat and drought. The earliest mammals scurried in shadows, tiny and silent. If you were standing there, you might not even recognize the soundscape. There would be no bird songs to fill the air, no buzzing of bees, no hum of insects visiting flowers, because flowers did not yet exist. Instead, you'd hear the rustle of cycads in the wind, the distant hiss of volcanic vents, and perhaps the haunting calls of early reptiles echoing across the plains. This was an Earth in recovery. Just before the Mesozoic began, the world had endured one of its darkest hours, the Permian extinction, a catastrophe so severe that it nearly erased life itself. Around 90% of ocean species vanished, and much of life on land followed. The Earth was left almost barren, a silence after the storm of creation. The Mesozoic would be the long, patient rebuilding project that followed, life experimenting again after ruin, testing new shapes, filling empty spaces, rediscovering what it could be. Imagine standing at the edge of one of Pangaea's deserts. The ground beneath your feet glows red under a harsh sun, heat waves dancing on the horizon. Rivers cut through the land like veins of life, carrying narrow ribbons of green across an otherwise barren world. Follow those rivers, and you'd find lush oases where amphibians lingered, where small reptiles darted between shadows, where the first ancestors of dinosaurs stirred, still unremarkable, but persistent. The Earth was open again, ecological space waiting to be filled. Talking about the Mesozoic as if it were a single story is misleading, though. It wasn't a moment. It was a vast era spanning almost 186 million years, from about 252 million years ago to 66 million years ago. In that time, continents drifted, climates shifted, and entire species rose, flourished, and vanished. To put it in perspective, the whole of recorded human history fits into only a few thousand years. Our species, Homo sapiens, has existed for perhaps 300,000. The Mesozoic lasted more than 600 times longer than that. Long enough for mountain ranges to rise and erode away, long enough for the face of the earth to change again and again. To walk through this age is not to stand still in one moment but to drift across a tide of transformations. When most people hear Mesozoic, they think dinosaurs. And that's fair, this was their stage, their golden age. But focusing only on them is like describing a symphony by a single note. The Mesozoic was also the age of new oceans, of drifting continents, of skies filled with experimental wings and seas ruled by reptilian hunters. It was an age of fluctuating climates, sometimes so hot that polar forests grew beneath long summer suns, sometimes cooling into milder, wetter intervals. It was an age when plants quietly reinvented themselves, preparing the way for flowering forests that would one day look like our own. Imagine looking up at the Mesozoic sky. Today we see birds tracing graceful arcs, but back then, true birds were only beginning to emerge. Their feathers were simpler, their flight clumsier. For most of that time, the skies belonged to the pterosaurs, reptiles with wings stretched across elongated fingers. Some were no larger than sparrows. Others had wingspans wider than small airplanes. They glided above coasts and plains, scanning for fish or carrion, their shadows gliding over dunes and forests. Beneath them, the seas shimmered with life. Sleek ichthyosaurs, shaped like dolphins, surged through the waves, chasing schools of fish. Long-necked plesiosaurs wove through the water like living myths, their heads darting after prey. And later came the mosasaurs, massive lizards turned sea monsters, jaws wide enough to swallow a person whole. Even the structure of the oceans was different. Reefs were built not by modern corals but by ancient sponges and bivalves. The shores were strewn with shells unfamiliar to us, twisted, coiled, elaborate. And everywhere, the spiral shells of ammonites, cousins of modern squid, floated by the millions, marking time like natural clocks within the sea. On land, forests of conifers, cycads, and ginkgos rose like living cathedrals. The ground was carpeted with ferns and horsetails taller than a person. The world was green, but not the green we know. There were no flowers yet, no bursts of color, no perfumes. Only shades of emerald, olive, and deep brown. And into this green silence came the dinosaurs. At first, they were small and unremarkable, darting between shadows, living quietly among other reptiles. But over millions of years, they adapted and diversified. Some walked on 2 legs, others on 4, and some shifted between both. They grew into titans, the sauropods, longer than buses, heavier than any land animal before or since. And as the herbivores grew, so did their hunters, agile predators at first, later giants like Allosaurus and, much later, Tyrannosaurus. But this wasn't only a story of size. It was a story of subtlety, of small mammals hiding in underbrush, of insects evolving alongside plants, of ecosystems weaving together in complex balance. As Pangaea broke apart into smaller continents, species became isolated. Dinosaurs of one region evolved differently from those of another. Diversity bloomed across the globe, each lineage reflecting the land it called home. The earth was writing its own story in stone. Rivers laid down sediments that hardened into rock, preserving the bones of creatures long gone. Volcanic ash settled in layers, marking time like chapters in a book. Every fossil unearthed today, every bone, feather, and footprint, is a fragment of that story, a memory of the world before us. When paleontologists brush the dust from a fossil, they're not just uncovering a creature. They're uncovering an entire world, one that smelled of conifers, echoed with reptilian calls, and shimmered under unfamiliar stars. The Mesozoic was not a single world frozen in time but a vast theater of change. Deserts turned to swamps, plains gave way to seas, forests rose and fell with the ages. Life experimented endlessly, reshaping itself with every turn. From the first timid steps of dinosaurs to their thunderous reign across continents, it was a saga of resilience, of Earth imagining itself anew. And as we drift deeper into this age, we'll follow its stories one by one, the rise of dinosaurs, the spread of forests, the life of the oceans, the shifting skies, the coming of flowers, and at last, the catastrophe that brought it all to an end. Because to ask what Earth was like during the Mesozoic isn't to seek a single picture. It's to embark on a long, winding journey, one that spans nearly 200 million years of Earth's imagination. And so, let's begin that journey together, slowly, patiently, in whispers of time. When people think of the Mesozoic, the mind almost always leaps to dinosaurs, immense shadows moving through prehistoric forests, their calls echoing across plains untouched by human sound. Yet for all their fame, the dinosaurs were never alone. They lived in worlds alive with neighbors, creatures of air, land, and sea, each woven into the same vast tapestry of survival. The age we call theirs was not a stage for giants alone, but a crowded and complex world, as busy and layered as any jungle or savanna today. To understand their era, you have to step beyond the silhouettes of the mighty sauropods and the jaws of the tyrants, and look closer, to the small, the quiet, and the unseen. Imagine standing in a valley during the Jurassic period. The air hums with warmth and scent, the sharp resin of conifers, the damp earthiness of ferns beneath your feet. The light filters through the canopy in shafts of gold, falling across trunks the size of towers. To your left, a herd of sauropods moves like a living procession, their long necks swaying above the treetops as they strip branches clean. Their footsteps sink deep into soft ground, each one leaving behind a crater large enough to fill with rainwater. But closer to the earth, life thrums in miniature. Tiny mammals, no larger than mice, scurry through leaf litter, their whiskers twitching as they sniff for insects. Early lizards bask on fallen logs, their eyes sharp, every muscle ready to flee. Somewhere above, unseen wings flutter, small pterosaurs chasing dragonflies over a clearing. The Mesozoic was never silent. It pulsed with sound and motion, every inch alive with purpose. The dinosaurs were the most visible, yes, but they were part of a chorus, not a solo. Across open plains, herds of plant-eating dinosaurs grazed together much like wildebeest today, their sheer numbers shaking the ground. Each step left tracks that would one day harden into fossils, footprints pressed into stone, recording not individuals but entire communities. Along rivers and lakes, crocodile-like reptiles waited, silent hunters with patience older than mountains. They watched the edges of the water where thirsty dinosaurs leaned to drink, their eyes just breaking the surface. A quick surge, a splash, and another life was claimed. Above, the skies shimmered with pterosaurs, gliding effortlessly on warm air currents. Their sharp eyes scanned below for anything that moved, a fish near the surface, a carcass in the mud, a chance for a meal. Even beneath the soil, the cycle continued. Insects crawled and burrowed, feeding on decay, breaking down plants, returning nutrients to the earth. They were the invisible workers of the age, keeping the wheel of life turning long before flowers and pollinators existed. The Mesozoic was not the tidy tale of one group's triumph. It was a dynamic web, life intertwined, balancing, competing, and evolving side by side. In the early Triassic, before dinosaurs had found their stride, other reptiles dominated the land. The ancestors of modern crocodiles, pseudosuchians, came in extraordinary forms. Some looked like armored tanks, their backs covered in plates. Others ran upright on long legs, swift and deadly, filling roles that dinosaurs would later inherit. There were creatures that looked like living experiments, half familiar, half imagined, reptiles with beaks, spikes, or sails that caught the sun. Evolution, in that dawn after catastrophe, was a restless artist trying every design it could. The world was recovering from extinction, and the ecosystems were still fragile, rebuilding themselves layer by layer. The earliest dinosaurs were small, light-boned, and easily overlooked beside their more imposing reptilian cousins. Yet they survived. They waited. And when the climate shifted, when drought and fire and change reshaped the land, they rose quietly into opportunity. But even then, they were not alone. Crocodilian relatives continued to thrive in the rivers. Amphibians clung to damp corners of the world. In the seas, the great marine reptiles, ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs, ruled without challenge. One of the most fascinating truths about this age is how connected everything was. When we picture a dinosaur standing in a clearing, we often see it as isolated, a lone titan in an empty landscape. But the real Mesozoic was full of movement and interaction. The giants that browsed on conifers shaped their own forests. As they fed, they opened space for sunlight to reach the ground, allowing smaller plants to flourish. The predators that hunted those giants left carcasses behind, feeding scavengers and insects that in turn nourished birds and mammals. Even the air carried change, seeds and spores drifting across continents, reshaping plant life far from where it began. Everything touched everything else. Now, imagine a late Cretaceous wetland, a world near the end of the age. Herds of hadrosaurs, the duck-billed dinosaurs, graze along the water's edge. Their calls echo, low, resonant notes that ripple through the reeds, messages between parents and young, warnings of predators, or perhaps simple conversation among the herd. Between their legs, mammals dart in and out of burrows, small, clever survivors of the night. Some climb low shrubs in search of seeds, their delicate fingers grasping stems. Others dig through the mud for insects, never straying far from cover. The water stirs as a crocodile slides silently beneath the surface, its eyes glinting just above the current. Overhead, pterosaurs circle like shadows, their wings catching the light as they glide, their eyes sharp and ancient. It is not an empty world, nor a quiet one. It is crowded, vibrant, alive, a layered symphony of coexistence. Even the plants were neighbors in this grand design. Early in the Mesozoic, the Earth's greenery was dominated by gymnosperms, trees and shrubs like conifers, cycads, and ginkgos. These plants didn't rely on flowers or fruits. Their seeds were naked, carried by the wind. They formed the backbone of ancient forests, offering shelter and food to creatures great and small. There were no petals to attract pollinators, no fruit to tempt mammals or birds. Yet insects still adapted, feeding on sap, gnawing at leaves, crawling along cones and trunks. Life always finds a way to participate. When flowering plants, the angiosperms, finally appeared in the Cretaceous, they changed everything. Their blossoms invited pollinators, their fruits drew animals near, and their seeds spread farther and faster than ever before. It was an evolutionary revolution, subtle at first, but unstoppable. Within a few million years, flowers had painted the world with color. The variety of neighbors multiplied. New insects evolved to sip nectar and carry pollen. Small reptiles and mammals found food in abundance. The air itself grew richer, filled with scents that had never before existed on Earth. In this way, the Mesozoic became a rehearsal for the modern world. It's easy to imagine a dinosaur walking alone through a quiet forest, but that was never true. Like us, they lived among countless others, competitors, allies, parasites, and partners. Every movement they made sent ripples through the lives around them. On land, in water, and in air, their world was thick with life. The oceans, too, remind us of that balance. While dinosaurs ruled the land, the seas belonged to a different set of masters. Marine reptiles like ichthyosaurs darted through the waves with the speed and grace of modern dolphins. Plesiosaurs, with their long necks and paddle-like limbs, glided between schools of fish, their sleek forms casting shadows over the ocean floor. And in the later Cretaceous, the mighty mosasaurs emerged, lizards turned leviathans, predators so large that even other marine reptiles fell prey to them. The seas were not calm backdrops but dynamic worlds of constant motion. Schools of fish shimmered like living silver clouds. Ammonites spiraled through the depths, their shells glinting as they turned in the light. Crustaceans scuttled along the seafloor, and reefs teemed with creatures in colors we can only imagine. And though dinosaurs never swam among them, their fates were intertwined. The ocean's temperature influenced the climate of the continents. Rising and falling sea levels redrew coastlines, opening and closing habitats. The heartbeat of the sea pulsed through every part of the planet. Even insects, often overlooked, played vital roles. Their world thrived in miniature, buzzing and crawling and fluttering in endless motion. Beetles, flies, and the early relatives of butterflies filled every niche, eating, decomposing, pollinating. They were the quiet architects of ecosystems, unseen but essential. By the time flowering plants spread, insects were already waiting to partner with them, adapting quickly to the rewards of nectar and pollen. In every buzzing wing was a thread that connected to the dinosaurs, to the mammals, to the entire fabric of life. And then there were the mammals, often dismissed as small, forgettable side characters in the Age of Giants. Yet they were anything but insignificant. They were survivors. Clever, nocturnal, and adaptable. While the great reptiles thundered across the land, mammals carved out lives in the shadows. They climbed trees, tunneled into soil, glided between branches. They hunted insects, gathered seeds, and sometimes scavenged what the dinosaurs left behind. Their senses sharpened in darkness, keen hearing, strong smell, agile hands. They were waiting, not for the dinosaurs to fall, but for their own moment to rise. The Mesozoic, when seen whole, was not a story of domination by one group, but a celebration of coexistence. Each species, large or small, predator or prey, shaped the world it lived in. The dinosaurs may be the figures that capture our imagination now, but their neighbors tell us just as much about the Earth of that time. They remind us that no creature, not even the mightiest, lives apart from the web of life. Every roar echoed through a forest shaped by plants and insects. Every footprint pressed into soil teeming with unseen life. Every death fed something else, completing the circle. The Mesozoic was a time of giants, yes, but also of relationships, of connections, of worlds within worlds. And the more we look at that ancient Earth, the more we recognize something familiar in it. Because our world, too, is filled with neighbors we rarely notice, insects recycling the soil beneath us, birds tracing their paths above, mammals stirring through forests at night. The same rhythms that guided the dinosaurs still hum through the earth today. When you imagine that deep past, you are not just looking at what was lost. you're glimpsing the roots of what still survives. The neighbors of the dinosaurs are gone, their bones turned to stone, their voices silent. But their echoes remain, in the forests, in the waves, in the heartbeat of every living thing that followed. And when we listen closely enough, we can still hear those echoes, faint but steady, whispering through the ages. They remind us that life has always been shared. That no creature, no matter how grand, ever walked alone. If you were to stretch the story of Earth's history across a single ribbon of time, the Mesozoic would form a long, glowing span in its center, the vast middle act in the planet's drama. For nearly 200 million years, life pulsed to a new rhythm, and reptiles became the architects of a world reborn. This was, without exaggeration, the age of reptiles, an age when their kind ruled land, sea, and sky, filling every role from predator to grazer, from swimmer to flyer. To understand it is to step back and grasp not only their power but also their patience, the quiet endurance that let them dominate a planet reshaping itself. The story begins in the long shadow of ruin. The Permian extinction, which marked the end of the world before, had nearly swept the slate clean. Oceans emptied, forests burned, skies dimmed. It was the closest life had come to erasure. Yet out of that silence came opportunity. The Triassic dawned upon a scarred Earth, its landscapes harsh, its climates fierce, but also open, inviting new possibilities. And it was the reptiles who rose first to meet them. In the early Triassic, the survivors spread quickly. They were small at first, wiry, resourceful creatures crawling across cracked ground and basking in heat that would wither modern animals. Some grew armored, wearing plates of bone across their backs. Others ran on long, lean legs, swift and light. It was a time of experimentation, when evolution seemed restless, shaping bodies into strange, unfamiliar forms, testing every variation of limb, spine, and scale. There were no guarantees, only the relentless push to adapt. Among these early reptiles were the ancestors of crocodiles, the archosaurs, a group that would eventually give rise not only to the crocodilians themselves but to the pterosaurs and the dinosaurs. In those early days, the archosaurs came in many shapes. Some lumbered like tanks, others sprinted like greyhounds. They hunted, grazed, and filled the planet with possibility. The dinosaurs, at this point, were hardly dominant. They were newcomers, small and nimble, weaving between the legs of larger, older creatures that still held sway. If you could stand on the banks of a Triassic river, you'd see them as quick, alert figures, barely a meter tall, darting between shadows, chasing insects or scavenging what larger predators left behind. You might have noticed them, but you would not have guessed that they were the future. As the Triassic stretched on, Earth shifted again. Volcanic fires tore through the crust, releasing gases into the air. Climates grew unpredictable. Then, roughly 201 million years ago, another wave of extinction struck, a global upheaval that cleared away many of the dominant reptile lines. And when the smoke cleared, the dinosaurs were still standing. The stage was empty, and they stepped forward. That moment, quiet, almost accidental, marks the beginning of their true ascendancy. Through the Jurassic and into the Cretaceous, reptiles of every kind reshaped the planet. Dinosaurs dominated the land, their diversity staggering. In the oceans, marine reptiles filled the depths with motion and power. And above, pterosaurs spread their membranous wings across skies that had never before known such creatures. It's almost dizzying to think how long they ruled. Humanity measures time in decades, in centuries at most. The dinosaurs' empire lasted more than 160 million years. Entire species came and went within their age, entire continents drifted apart beneath their feet. To the Earth, dinosaurs weren't a fleeting experiment. They were the status quo. In the early Jurassic, enormous sauropods began their reign, creatures so vast that their hearts had to pump blood the height of a four-story building. On other continents, horned and frilled herbivores grazed in herds, while predators evolved to meet them, swift hunters, ambush specialists, and the mighty apex carnivores that still haunt our imagination. In the seas, sleek ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs hunted through waters teeming with life. Later came the mosasaurs, immense lizards turned sea monsters, their jaws lined with backward curving teeth that allowed no escape. And above it all, pterosaurs claimed the skies, the first vertebrates ever to truly master flight. Some were no larger than songbirds, others, like Quetzalcoatlus, had wingspans wider than a small plane. For more than 150 million years, they were the lords of the air. Birds may have taken over eventually, but the pterosaurs held the sky for far longer than birds have yet managed. When we call the Mesozoic the age of reptiles, it is not exaggeration, it is recognition. Reptiles defined the shape of ecosystems. Their bodies were the architecture around which life assembled itself. The land shook beneath their feet, the seas churned beneath their tails, the skies darkened beneath their wings. And yet, within that power, there was never stillness. Evolution never rested. The Triassic deserts gave way to Jurassic forests, and those forests transformed again in the Cretaceous into wetlands and flowering plains. The continents themselves shifted, Pangaea fractured, opening the Atlantic Ocean and scattering its children across the globe. Dinosaurs in one part of the world evolved differently from those in another, creating the breathtaking diversity we uncover in fossils today. Isolation bred invention. As climates shifted, so did the creatures. The early Triassic world was hot and arid, a land of red sands and sparse vegetation. But as time moved forward, the air grew thicker with moisture, the clouds heavier with rain. By the mid-Jurassic, the planet was green again. Forests of conifers and cycads covered the land, feeding the giants. By the Cretaceous, the world was almost tropical, a greenhouse planet, warm from pole to pole. Shallow seas flooded continents, creating archipelagos and inland oceans that shimmered under humid skies. And through it all, the reptiles adapted, endlessly. That adaptability was their secret. They could live in deserts, forests, swamps, and coasts. They could swim, fly, dig, and run. Their eggs could survive the air, their lungs could thrive in climates that would have suffocated others. They were not one creature but 1,000 variations on survival. To think of the dinosaurs as one group is to miss the point entirely. They were an empire of forms, armored stegosaurs with plates that glinted in the sun, duck-billed hadrosaurs with resonant crests that may have echoed across valleys, raptors with talons shaped like scythes, predators so immense that even their bones seemed to vibrate with memory. Each was a response to its world, a balance between climate, food, and competition, an expression of nature's imagination. In the seas, their cousins wrote their own saga. For most of the Mesozoic, fish were no longer the only lords of the deep. Reptiles claimed that kingdom too. Ichthyosaurs sped like torpedoes, some reaching the size of buses. Plesiosaurs glided gracefully, their long necks weaving through the water as their flippers beat in perfect rhythm. Later, mosasaurs appeared, powerful, sinuous, apex hunters that devoured fish, ammonites, and even one another. These were not side stories, they were the other half of the age's pulse. And the skies, oh, the skies were alive with movement. The earliest pterosaurs were fragile, their bones thin as reeds, their wings stretched taut over elongated fingers. But over millions of years, they evolved into a stunning variety of forms. Some skimmed oceans like modern seabirds, others hunted insects in forests or soared high above the coasts, gliding on thermals for hours without a single flap. In the late Cretaceous, a few grew monstrous in scale. Quetzalcoatlus northropi, the largest known pterosaur, may have stood taller than a giraffe when on the ground and cast a shadow wider than a house when in flight. Imagine seeing that silhouette drift across the clouds, a living embodiment of the ancient air. Through all of this, change was constant. Reptilian dominance was not a static thing, it was a flowing river, a series of successions and replacements. The plated stegosaurs of the Jurassic yielded to the horned ceratopsians of the Cretaceous. Smaller hunters gave way to larger, more specialized predators. Evolution was a slow, endless dance, rise, reign, and fall. Even after tens of millions of years, the Earth kept rewriting itself. The reasons for reptilian success were many: timing, physiology, and persistence among them. They survived the great extinctions when others did not. Their ability to thrive in different climates, to reproduce on land, and to grow in staggering ranges of size made them endlessly flexible. They were, quite simply, built for endurance. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about their age is how long it lasted, not a brief spark, but a steady burn. The world of the dinosaurs was not a static paradise, nor a constant war. It was a living balance, lush, dangerous, full of motion and mystery. For nearly 200 million years, reptiles shaped the rhythm of life, adapting to every beat the planet played. Their bones now rest in stone, but their legacy lingers, in every bird that takes flight, in every scaled creature that basks beneath the sun, in every breath of air that carries a hint of ancient warmth. When we call it the Age of Reptiles, we are not simply naming an era. We are remembering an inheritance, one that taught the Earth to dream in shapes of scale and bone and wing. And as we look back across that vast expanse of time, it is humbling to realize, the world they built is still beneath our feet. The mountains they walked upon, the seas they filled, the air they changed, all of it remains, reshaped but not erased. The Age of Reptiles was not merely the age of their dominance. It was the age when Earth learned to become alive again. If the land during the Mesozoic was alive with the sound of footsteps, roars, and rustling plants, then the oceans carried their own symphony, a quieter, deeper pulse that echoed beneath the waves. The seas of that age were not empty blue expanses but living worlds, crowded with motion and invention. They shimmered with life that seemed both alien and familiar, and through them, the planet itself learned to breathe again. At the dawn of the Mesozoic, those seas were wounded. The great extinction that had ended the Permian period had turned oceans into graveyards. Coral reefs had vanished, fish had died off in staggering numbers, and the chemistry of the water itself had been thrown into chaos. For millions of years, the ocean was a place of scarcity, where even the simplest forms of life struggled to hold on. But life, as it always does, began to rebuild. In the Triassic seas, new coral species returned, though they were not quite the same as those that came before. Sponges and mollusks spread over the seafloor, and plankton began to bloom again in the sunlit shallows. With food once more abundant, small fish darted through the currents, and in their wake came predators. That's when the reptiles entered the water. Among the first of these marine pioneers were the ichthyosaurs, descendants of land-dwelling reptiles that had taken to hunting along coastlines and gradually adapted to life at sea. Evolution worked quickly on them. Within only a few million years, they had become creatures perfectly shaped for their new home, sleek, powerful swimmers with long snouts lined with teeth and bodies that could slice through water like torpedoes. If you were to see one from a distance, you might mistake it for a dolphin. But look closer, and the differences would reveal themselves: great, unblinking eyes built to see in the dim light of the deep, and a tail that moved side to side rather than up and down. They were hunters of remarkable speed and grace, pursuing fish and squid through ancient waters. Some ichthyosaurs grew to the size of buses, their bodies gliding effortlessly through the depths. They were among the first true monarchs of the Mesozoic Sea. But they were not alone. At the same time, another group of marine reptiles began to explore the ocean's possibilities, the plesiosaurs. Their bodies were a study in contrasts, broad and flat like turtles, with limbs that had transformed into powerful flippers, but crowned with impossibly long necks and small, pointed heads. A plesiosaur in motion looked almost unreal, its four flippers sweeping through the water in elegant, alternating strokes, more like a bird flying underwater than a fish swimming through it. Some species had necks that stretched as long as their bodies, allowing them to dart at prey with lightning speed. Others had shorter, thicker necks and jaws strong enough to crush large fish. They were predators of ambush and precision, moving through a realm that seemed endless. Around them, the seas filled with other forms, ammonites, those coiled-shelled relatives of squid and octopuses, floating by the millions. Their shells, some no larger than a coin and others wider than a person, shimmered in spirals of pearlescent color. They drifted through the water column like living ornaments, rising and falling with the tides. The ammonites were hunters, too, tentacles reaching out for smaller creatures, beaks sharp and efficient. Yet they were also prey, their shells broken open by ichthyosaurs and other predators. Theirs was a brief, brilliant existence, one repeated over countless generations, layer upon layer, until their shells formed whole cliffs of fossilized spirals, the story of an ocean written in stone. Alongside them swam the belemnites, sleek and bullet-shaped, closer in form to modern squid. Their bodies were built for speed, their arms bristling with hooks to seize prey. Together, ammonites and belemnites became the heartbeat of the marine food web, the base upon which giants fed. By the mid-Jurassic, the oceans had grown vibrant again. Reef systems had returned, though the reefs of that age were not quite like our coral kingdoms today. They were often built by rudest clams, strange, pillar-like mollusks that grew in clusters, their shells forming towers and walls that stretched for miles. These reefs became havens of color and movement, teeming with fish, crustaceans, starfish, and creatures whose shells glowed under the filtered light. If you could have swum through one, it would have seemed both alien and wondrous, a labyrinth of shapes, full of life at every scale. As the Jurassic gave way to the Cretaceous, the seas became even more restless. Global temperatures rose, ice all but vanished from the poles, and sea levels climbed higher than ever before. Vast inland seas flooded the continents, transforming dry lands into shallow, sunlit oceans. North America, for instance, was split in two by the Western Interior Seaway, a warm, shallow stretch of water that ran from what is now the Arctic Ocean down to the Gulf of Mexico. Imagine standing on its shores, the air heavy with humidity, the horizon shimmering with heat, and the water alive with motion. It was here that the next rulers of the sea appeared, the mosasaurs. Descended from land-dwelling lizards, mosasaurs were among the most astonishing examples of adaptation in Earth's history. Within a few million years, they had become fully marine, their legs transformed into flippers, their bodies elongated and muscular. Their tails, driven by immense power, made them some of the fastest swimmers of their time. And they were enormous. Some species stretched over 15 meters long, true leviathans. Their jaws could open wide enough to swallow prey nearly whole, and their teeth curved backward like hooks, preventing escape. The mosasaurs ruled the late Cretaceous seas as apex predators, hunting fish, ammonites, and even one another. Fossils have been found with smaller mosasaurs inside the stomachs of larger ones, a stark reminder that in those oceans, even kings were never safe. Yet even amid this danger, beauty thrived. Fish darted through coral and clam reefs, their scales catching sunlight that filtered down through waves. Sharks, still quiet players in the background, swam among them, ancestors of the hunters we know today. Crustaceans scuttled across the sand. Sea urchins and starfish clung to rock and reef. And all around, clouds of plankton drifted like invisible snow, feeding everything from the smallest filter feeder to the greatest predator. These plankton, tiny, unseen lives, may have been the most influential of all. They formed the base of the food chain, and when they died, their microscopic shells drifted down to the seafloor. Over millions of years, those shells built up into vast layers of chalk and limestone, the bones of the ocean itself. Even now, when you look at the white cliffs of Dover or similar formations around the world, you are looking at the remains of Cretaceous seas, entire oceans compressed into stone. The rhythm of those waters shaped the land as well. As sea levels rose and fell, coastlines shifted. Warm currents carried heat across the globe, changing climates far inland. The Mesozoic seas were not just habitats, they were the engines of the planet's weather, the breath that moved between land and sky. And the creatures within them were more than hunters and prey. They were part of a cycle that bound the world together. The plankton gave oxygen to the air. The reefs created habitats for fish. The predators kept populations in balance. Each played its role, as vital as the next. The longer you imagine it, the more alive it becomes, the flash of scales under sunlight, the ripple of a plesiosaur's neck, the silent drift of an ammonite through the dim light. It was a world of motion, every moment a continuation of the last, every life dependent on another. And though millions of years separate us from it, traces remain everywhere. In whales that echo the shapes of ichthyosaurs. In sea turtles whose flippers recall the movement of plesiosaurs. In the hunting patterns of sharks that mirror those of the mosasaurs. The ocean remembers. When the Mesozoic ended, the seas changed again. The great reptiles vanished, swept away by the same catastrophe that ended the age of dinosaurs on land. The mosasaurs and plesiosaurs disappeared, the ammonites faded from existence. But their legacy lived on in new forms, in fish, in turtles, in the ancestors of whales. The sea has always been the great storyteller of life, its memory written not in ink but in layers of sediment and fossil. And if you could listen closely enough, you might still hear the echoes, the rush of flippers through dark water, the silent spiral of ammonite shells sinking into the deep, the whisper of ancient tides that shaped the world we know. The Mesozoic seas were not the background of that story. They were half of its heartbeat. And every wave that touches a shore today carries, somewhere within it, the faint memory of that age, the ancient breath of an ocean that has never truly stopped dreaming. If you close your eyes and imagine the Mesozoic world, it's easy to picture the movement of animals, the thunder of footsteps, the beating of wings, the splash of tails through ancient seas. But listen more closely, and you'll hear something else beneath all that motion, the soft, unending rustle of leaves. Before there were herds and predators, before the skies were filled with wings, there were forests, immense, breathing worlds of green that covered the earth like a living skin. These were the forests of giants, and though their names are mostly forgotten, their presence shaped everything. Every step a dinosaur took, every breath it drew, every meal it ate, all of it began with plants. In the early Triassic, after the planet's great extinction, the world was bare and scorched. Forests had vanished across vast stretches of land, leaving only scattered survivors clinging to life. But plants are the quiet architects of recovery, and even after the most brutal losses, they always return. Slowly, green began to creep across the land again, ferns sprouting beside rivers, hardy conifers rising in valleys, seed-bearing trees reclaiming the light. By the Middle Triassic, the earth had healed enough for forests to spread once more. And as they grew, the atmosphere began to shift. With each leaf and needle, plants drew in carbon dioxide and exhaled oxygen, slowly transforming the planet into something that could support the vast, breathing worlds to come. Walk with me into that ancient forest. The air is thick and warm, humid, fragrant, filled with the sharp resin of conifers and the earthy scent of wet soil. The canopy above isn't woven from familiar leaves but from strange, needle-like fronds and broad, waxy fans. Sunlight filters down in narrow, golden beams, striking motes of dust that drift like tiny stars. Beneath your feet lies a carpet of ferns, not small, delicate ones like you might find today, but towering, waist-high giants. Horsetails grow in dense clusters, their hollow stalks reaching toward the light. Cycads, with their thick trunks and spiraling crowns of leaves, stand scattered through the undergrowth like sentinels. This is the world as it looked long before flowers, a green that comes not from petals and color, but from endurance. The great forests of the Mesozoic were built not by flowering trees but by gymnosperms, a vast family that includes conifers, cycads, and ginkgos. These plants were the lungs of the age, the silent keepers of the earth's balance. Conifers dominated the uplands and slopes, their tall, narrow shapes catching the wind. They dropped cones rather than fruits, and their waxy needles resisted the heat and dryness of changing climates. Cycads, short and stout, grew in clusters across open plains. Their seeds were encased in hard shells, carried by wind or water. And then there were the ginkgos, with their fan-shaped leaves, delicate, symmetrical, unlike anything else on Earth. In the Mesozoic, ginkgo forests stretched across continents. Their leaves turned golden each year before falling, carpeting the ground in quiet beauty. These plants didn't need flowers to attract attention. Their survival came from resilience, not display. But in their simplicity, they built the foundation for life. The great sauropods, with their long necks and endless hunger, fed on the crowns of conifers, stripping needles and branches as easily as we might pluck fruit. Smaller herbivores grazed on cycads and ferns. Even the smallest insects found homes in the bark, feeding on sap or burrowing beneath the surface. Every inch of forest was alive with movement, not chaotic, but balanced, each layer supporting another. And the forests themselves shaped the land. Their roots held soil in place against erosion. Their fallen trunks enriched the ground, feeding new growth. The vast canopy cooled the air and trapped moisture, creating pockets of humidity where amphibians and reptiles thrived. If you could hover above a Mesozoic continent, you'd see an endless patchwork of green, dark conifer forests in the highlands, lighter cycads and ferns in the valleys, and along the coasts, dense wetlands of horsetails and club mosses waving in the breeze. It was a world in motion, but its rhythm was slow, the steady pulse of growth, decay, and renewal. For millions of years, these forests stood largely unchanged. Then, something extraordinary began to happen. In the Cretaceous, a quiet revolution took root. Among the gymnosperms, a new kind of plant began to appear, one that would change the planet forever. These newcomers produced not cones, but flowers. At first, they were small and humble, perhaps nothing more than clusters of modified leaves surrounding a few seeds. But they carried a secret advantage: precision. Where gymnosperms relied on the randomness of wind to spread pollen, flowering plants used partnership. They offered rewards, nectar, color, scent, to lure insects and, later, birds. In return, those visitors carried pollen exactly where it needed to go. It was an alliance between plant and animal, a bond that made reproduction faster and more reliable. This was the birth of the angiosperms, the flowering plants. At first, they were rare. The forests of the Cretaceous still belonged to conifers and cycads. But as time went on, flowers spread, quietly, steadily, across riverbanks, meadows, and valleys. Each bloom was a signal of change. Insects evolved alongside them, learning to navigate petals, to sip nectar, to carry pollen from one blossom to another. The air began to fill with colors and scents that had never existed before. And as the flowers spread, they invited others. Small mammals began to feed on their seeds and fruits. Birds, descended from feathered dinosaurs, began to sip from their nectar. The world was becoming richer, not only in form, but in connection. The forests of giants gave way to forests of diversity. By the late Cretaceous, the earth had transformed. The green monotony of conifers and cycads had become a patchwork of flowers, shrubs, and leafy trees. The air smelled different. The colors shifted. The ecosystems grew more intricate, every creature finding new ways to live, feed, and thrive. For the dinosaurs, it meant abundance. New foods, new habitats. The great herbivores found more to eat, the small omnivores more to explore. For insects, it was an explosion of opportunity, an endless world of pollen and petals. And yet, even in this age of flowering life, the old plants endured. Conifers still stood tall in the highlands. Ginkgos still fanned their golden leaves each autumn. Cycads still clung to rocky ground. They had seen the rise and fall of countless ages, and they would outlast even the dinosaurs. To this day, they survive as living fossils, reminders of a time when their kind ruled the green world. Every pine tree that pierces a mountain slope, every ginkgo leaf that flutters in the wind, they are echoes of that distant age. The air you breathe still carries traces of their work, the oxygen they helped create, the balance they began. The Mesozoic forests were not simply backdrops to the dinosaurs' reign. They were partners in it, quiet, steadfast, and eternal. When we think of life on Earth, we often look to what moves, to animals, to action, to sound. But the plants remind us of something deeper, that all movement begins with stillness, and all power begins with patience. Those forests built the stage upon which every creature of the Mesozoic lived its life. They shaped the air, the soil, and the rhythm of time itself. And even now, when a breeze stirs through the trees outside your window, that same rhythm continues, a whisper from the green heart of the earth, carrying the memory of a forest that once fed giants. Above the forests and plains of the Mesozoic, beyond the reach of even the tallest conifers, another world unfolded, one of wind, light, and endless distance. It was a realm without boundaries, a space both fragile and free. We call it the sky, and during the Mesozoic, it belonged not to birds, at least, not yet, but to other pioneers. This was the Sky Kingdom, ruled first by the pterosaurs, the masters of the air long before feathers learned to soar. If you could stand beneath that ancient sky, you would not see flocks as we do now, no synchronized wings beating in rhythm, no chirping calls of modern birds. Instead, you'd see silhouettes that defied comparison, creatures with wings stretched like sails across the wind, bodies both elegant and strange, gliding in silence. The air itself shimmered with them. Along coastlines, they soared above the surf, diving to snatch fish from the waves. Over inland rivers, they drifted lazily in thermals rising from warm ground. And above the vast deserts of Pangaea, they circled in the heat haze, their shadows gliding over the sand like living ghosts. For over 150 million years, the pterosaurs ruled these skies, longer than any flying creature since. They were the first vertebrates to truly conquer flight. But their story began humbly. In the late Triassic, when the world was still recovering from extinction, small reptiles began to experiment with gliding. Some may have leapt from cliffs or trees, spreading elongated ribs or membranes of skin to slow their fall. Evolution took those tentative steps and refined them into something revolutionary. The earliest known pterosaurs were delicate, lightweight creatures, little more than a meter across, with wings stretched between elongated fingers. Their bones were hollow, their muscles finely tuned, their bodies light enough to lift on air currents. These were not clumsy gliders but capable flyers, already mastering the elements their ancestors had only dared to test. Their wings were masterpieces of design, skin and muscle stretched from the elongated fourth finger down to their ankles, forming a living sail that could flex, twist, and shift mid-flight. The bones of their arms were reinforced yet slender, and their chest muscles anchored to a keel-like sternum, built for the power of flight strokes. They were engineers of the wind, refined not by intention but by time. As the Jurassic dawned, pterosaurs diversified. Some developed long, slender jaws lined with interlocking teeth, perfect for catching fish. Others had shorter snouts for crushing insects or small prey. A few even lost their teeth entirely, evolving beaks instead. Their heads grew adorned with crests, thin ridges or towering spines of bone that extended from their skulls. Some crests were small and sharp, others vast and colorful. We may never know their full purpose, but many scientists believe they were used for display, signals between individuals, advertisements of strength or beauty. Imagine the sight of a dawn sky filled with them, pterosaurs rising from cliffs and trees, their wings catching the light, their crests glowing red and gold in the sunrise. By the mid-Jurassic, they were everywhere, from tropical coastlines to inland lakes. Their fossils appear on every continent, a testament to how completely they embraced the sky. Some were the size of sparrows, delicate and quick. Others reached wingspans of several meters, gliding over seas in search of prey. And they were not merely flyers, they were part of a vast, interconnected world. When they swooped down to feed, they linked sea and sky. When they nested along cliffs, they became part of the coastal ecosystem, their eggs feeding scavengers, their droppings enriching soil for plants below. Even in flight, they influenced the rhythms of the land beneath them. Then, in the Cretaceous, the Sky Kingdom reached its zenith. The pterosaurs grew larger, more varied, more extraordinary. Their forms ranged from the sleek, fish-hunting pteranodon with its magnificent backward crest to the small, agile Rhamphorhynchus, whose tail ended in a diamond-shaped vein. And towering above them all was Quetzalcoatlus northropi, perhaps the largest flying creature the world has ever seen. With wings spanning nearly 12 meters, it was a giant that defied imagination. On land, it may have stood taller than a giraffe, and in the air, it could have soared for hours without landing, catching thermals like modern vultures or albatrosses. Picture it, a vast desert plain, warm air rising in shimmering waves, and above it, the shadow of Quetzalcoatlus, circling in near silence, the wind whispering through its wings like breath through a cathedral. Yet the pterosaurs were not the only inhabitants of that ancient sky. During the Jurassic, something remarkable began to stir in the forests below, a new kind of creature with feathers not only for warmth or display, but for flight. The first of them, small and tentative, had wings that were clumsy compared to the pterosaur's perfect design. But within those feathers lay a secret: flexibility. Feathers could change shape, trap air, insulate, and color the body. They could serve many purposes, and evolution would use them all. Among these early experiments was a creature named Archaeopteryx, the first true bird. It lived around 150 million years ago, during the late Jurassic, gliding through the forests of what is now Germany. Its skeleton was a mosaic of ancient and new, teeth in its jaws, claws on its wings, a long bony tail like its reptilian ancestors. Yet it bore feathers nearly identical to those of modern birds. When Archaeopteryx first took flight, it was not yet a master of the air. Its wings beat unevenly, it likely relied on gliding more than sustained flight. But it marked the beginning of something profound, a lineage that would endure long after the pterosaurs vanished. The first birds shared the skies with their reptilian cousins for more than 80 million years. For much of that time, they were small, quiet, unassuming. But their potential was vast. Feathers allowed for rapid adaptation, to cold, to display, to maneuverability. And so, slowly, the Sky Kingdom began to change hands. Still, for all the beauty of their flight, the pterosaurs never lost their grace. They adapted right up until the end. In the late Cretaceous, the skies were home to an astonishing diversity of them, from the small, swift Nyctosaurus, with its enormous sail-like crest, to the gigantic Hatzegopteryx, whose wings spanned an ancient sea that covered parts of Europe. Each species had found its place in the wind. The skies of the late Cretaceous would have been a breathtaking sight, great wings gliding across endless blue, the air alive with motion, the light catching on leathery membranes and downy feathers alike. It was a shared kingdom, an era of two dynasties in the air, one ancient, one rising. But even the sky is not eternal. When the end came, the great impact, the firestorm, the long night, it took both rulers. The pterosaurs, so perfectly built for their time, could not endure the aftermath. The smaller birds, however, survived, their resilience carrying them into the new world that followed. And so, the sky that had once belonged to the pterosaurs became the inheritance of birds. Every gull that rides an ocean wind, every swallow that darts above a summer field, every eagle that soars across a mountain range, all of them are echoes of that Mesozoic sky. Their wings carry the memory of the first flight, the long experiment that began with scales and stretched skin, and ended in feathers and song. When you watch a bird take off today, you are witnessing the continuation of a story that began over 200 million years ago, a story of courage written on the air itself. The Sky Kingdom was more than an ecosystem. It was a promise, proof that life could break free from the ground and learn to ride the wind. Even now, the air remembers. The same thermals that lifted pterosaurs still rise from the sun-warmed earth. The same currents that carried Archaeopteryx glide beneath the wings of modern birds. The sky has never been empty since. And somewhere, in the hush before dawn or the stillness after sunset, when you see the silhouette of a bird drifting across the fading light, remember this: you are looking at the oldest dream life ever had, the dream of flight. When we think of the Mesozoic, we often picture teeth, long, curved, gleaming in the sunlight. We imagine claws tearing through ferns, the heavy thud of footsteps on ancient soil, the echo of roars that rolled through forests and plains. The predators of that age have become icons, their names whispered like spells: Allosaurus, Velociraptor, Spinosaurus, Tyrannosaurus. They are the symbols of power and fear, the embodiment of survival at its fiercest. But behind those names lies something far deeper, not just strength, but adaptation, intelligence, and balance. For every predator, there was a prey. For every strike, there was a counter. The great hunters did not simply dominate their world, they were part of its design, as essential to the ecosystem as the trees, the rivers, and the wind. The Mesozoic world was not endless violence. It was rhythm. The first true carnivorous dinosaurs emerged quietly in the Triassic, when the Earth was still young and the continents still bound together as Pangaea. They were small, agile, and fast, creatures like Coelophysis and Herosaurus, no bigger than wolves, built for speed and cunning. They hunted in packs, darting through forests and open plains, relying on agility rather than brute force. Their teeth were sharp and serrated, their arms slender but strong, their senses alert to every movement. To imagine them is to picture grace rather than terror, quick shadows flickering through the heat of a Triassic afternoon, always watching, always calculating. Over time, as the Earth changed, so did they. The Jurassic brought forth a new generation of predators, larger, more specialized, more powerful. The continents began to drift apart, climates softened, and lush forests returned. With abundance came opportunity. And where there is abundance, hunters grow bold. Among the greatest of these was Allosaurus, the apex predator of the Jurassic. It stood over 8 meters long, with jaws lined with dozens of serrated teeth, each one curved like a blade. Its arms were muscular, tipped with 3 claws that could tear through flesh. But what made Allosaurus truly formidable was not just its size, it was its versatility. Unlike some later predators, it was not built for short, brutal ambushes. It was a relentless pursuer, capable of endurance. Fossil evidence suggests that Allosaurus hunted cooperatively, perhaps even in groups, stalking herds of sauropods and stegosaurids across wide valleys. It could open its jaws wider than most other carnivores, allowing it to deliver deep, slashing bites before retreating to wait for its prey to weaken. Its skull was lighter than expected, not a weapon of pure crushing force, but a finely tuned instrument of precision. Allosaurus was a strategist. Yet even in the Age of Titans, no predator reigned unchallenged. The Jurassic was a theater of balance. The vast sauropods fed without fear but were watched constantly by smaller, faster carnivores. Each ecosystem held its own hierarchy, a careful equation of strength and survival. By the time the Cretaceous began, evolution had refined the art of hunting into something astonishing. The raptors appeared. They were not the giants of the age, but they were its thinkers. Small, swift, and terrifyingly coordinated, raptors like Velociraptor and Deinonychus were built for precision. They had long tails that acted as rudders, stabilizing them mid-leap. Their hands were nimble, their claws curved and razor-sharp, and on each foot, they bore a single enlarged talon, the infamous sickle claw. They could run fast, leap high, and strike with surgical accuracy. But their true advantage lay in their intelligence. Their skulls housed large brains relative to their body size, and the shape of their inner ears suggests exceptional balance and coordination. Some scientists believe they hunted cooperatively, communicating with chirps and calls, moving like wolves through ferns and shadows. If you had stood among them, you might not have heard them approach. You would have only felt the brush of air as they passed, silent, calculating, precise. The raptors were not large, but they did not need to be. They embodied evolution's most efficient design, the perfect balance between speed, strength, and awareness. And while they hunted, the world around them changed again. The Cretaceous was warmer, wetter, and more diverse. Flowering plants spread across the continents. Insects thrived. Herbivorous dinosaurs grew in number and form, armored ankylosaurs, horned ceratopsians, duck-billed hadrosaurs. Each of them evolved defenses against predators. And with every defense, a new kind of hunter evolved to meet it. Then, in the late Cretaceous, came the most famous of them all, Tyrannosaurus rex. No name in paleontology carries more weight, no image more instantly recognizable. But T. rex was more than myth, it was the final, perfected product of millions of years of evolution. At over 12 meters long and weighing as much as 7 tons, it was one of the largest terrestrial predators ever to walk the earth. Its skull alone stretched more than 1.5 meters, and its bite force was unmatched, capable of crushing bone with every chomp. But T. rex was not a mindless brute. Its eyes faced forward, granting it depth perception. Its sense of smell was extraordinary, perhaps among the best of any land animal that ever lived. Its ears could detect low-frequency sounds from great distances. Its arms, though small, were powerful, each with two thick claws capable of holding struggling prey. Its massive legs, built like pillars, could move it with surprising speed, possibly reaching up to 30 kilometers per hour. Every feature of Tyrannosaurus rex was an answer to the environment it ruled. It did not simply kill. It shaped its ecosystem. Its presence alone influenced behavior. Herds of herbivores likely moved with caution, the tremor of heavy footsteps enough to send ripples of fear through miles of grassland. And yet, even this mighty predator was part of balance. For every T-Rex that hunted, dozens of smaller scavengers followed, feeding on the remains it left behind, cleaning the land, recycling what it did not consume. The great hunters of the Mesozoic were not destroyers, they were catalysts in the endless cycle of life and renewal. It's tempting to imagine the Mesozoic as a world ruled by chaos, but that chaos had order. Every predator's dominance was temporary. Every reign, no matter how powerful, eventually ended. Before T-Rex, there had been others: Spinosaurus, the strange, sailback giant that hunted fish in ancient river deltas; Giganotosaurus, the massive South American hunter that rivaled T-Rex in size; Mapusaurus, which may have hunted in coordinated groups to take down sauropods. Each continent had its own apex, its own ruler of tooth and claw. But each fell in turn, replaced by something new, something better adapted. And when the end came, the great impact that ended their age, even the greatest hunter of all could not escape. Yet the story of the predators does not end there. Because while the giants vanished, the small ones endured. Among the raptors and their kin were survivors, feathered descendants that would one day take to the air. Their lineage became the birds that still hunt today, not with claws and teeth, but with precision and cunning inherited from their ancestors. When an owl swoops silently through the night, or a hawk dives toward its prey, it carries echoes of the Mesozoic hunters in every motion. The ancient instinct of pursuit never died, it only changed form. The great hunters remind us that life is not only about creation, but about balance, that every world depends on both predator and prey, on both growth and release. The Mesozoic predators were not monsters. They were perfection, the natural outcome of patience, adaptation, and evolution's endless experimentation. And in their bones, now turned to stone, we still find that perfection, a whisper from the deep past telling us that even power, when guided by balance, can be beautiful. If the skies of the Mesozoic belonged to the pterosaurs and the seas to the ichthyosaurs and mosasaurs, then the land, the vast plains and forests that stretched from horizon to horizon, belonged to the giants. They were the living mountains of their time, creatures so immense that even the earth seemed to bend beneath them. Their necks reached treetops, their shadows darkened entire valleys, and their footsteps carved pathways that rivers would later follow. To live in their world was to live beneath them, to feel their presence in the trembling of the ground and the slow rhythm of their movement. They were the sauropods, and they were the largest animals ever to walk the earth. The story of the giants begins early, in the Triassic, when small, long-necked herbivores first began to appear among the early dinosaurs. Creatures like Plateosaurus and Ankylosaurus were the first steps toward gigantism, long-bodied, plant-eating reptiles that walked on both 2 and 4 legs, feeding on the lush greenery of the recovering world. They were not yet enormous, perhaps the size of a large horse, but evolution was already experimenting with size. For these animals, being big was protection. The larger they grew, the safer they became from predators. And the larger they became, the more plants they needed to sustain them. So began one of the most extraordinary arms races in the history of life. As the Earth's vegetation spread across the continents, the herbivores grew to match it. By the Jurassic, their descendants had become colossal. The sauropods, Names like Diplodocus, Brachiosaurus, Apatosaurus, and Brontosaurus dominated the landscape. They were miracles of engineering, creatures that defied gravity and physiology, yet somehow worked in perfect harmony with the planet that birthed them. A single adult Brachiosaurus could weigh more than 50 tons. Its heart pumped blood through a neck that stretched over 9 meters long, high enough to reach the tallest trees. Its lungs filled with air that passed through a complex system of air sacs, keeping the animal light enough to move and cool enough to survive under the heat of a Jurassic sun. Each footstep left impressions more than a meter wide, pressed deep into the mud, fossilized today as silent signatures of their passing. To imagine standing beside one is to feel small beyond measure. Its legs rose like columns, its torso a moving bridge of muscle and bone. Its neck swayed gently as it reached for branches, stripping foliage with teeth shaped for slicing rather than chewing. It did not rush. It could not. Its pace was that of the earth itself, slow, steady, unhurried. And yet, for all their size, sauropods were not clumsy or dull. Their skeletons show balance and elegance, their movements likely smoother than we might think. They lived in herds, families that moved together across the plains, the young sheltered among the legs of the adults. Their migrations followed the rhythms of the seasons, from wet lowlands to dry uplands and back again, always chasing the growth of green. They were the gardeners of their time, reshaping forests as they fed. Every tree they felled opened sunlight for smaller plants to grow. Every seed they swallowed and excreted carried new forests across the land. Even their deaths fed entire ecosystems, their immense bodies becoming havens of life for scavengers and soil alike. They were not only part of the earth. They were the earth, extensions of its cycles and continuations of its purpose. But not all giants were sauropods. Across the continents, the armored dinosaurs, the stegosaurs, ankylosaurs, and nodosaurs, evolved their own ways to command the land. While the sauropods relied on size and movement, these creatures relied on armor. Their bodies became fortresses of bone and horn, living shields against the hunters that stalked them. The Stegosaurus of the Jurassic was among the most striking, a creature that looked as though it had stepped straight from a dream. Its back was lined with 2 rows of towering plates, each one alive with blood vessels that could flush with color, perhaps for temperature control or display. Its tail ended in a cluster of spikes, the thagomizer, a weapon capable of piercing predators who dared to come too close. When the sun struck its plates at dawn, they may have glowed like bronze. Later, in the Cretaceous, came the ankylosaurs, low, heavy, almost tank-like herbivores covered in thick plates and studs of bone. Their tails bore clubs, solid masses of fused bone strong enough to shatter the legs of attacking predators. Fossils show battle scars on both predator and prey, proof that these encounters were neither rare nor one-sided. An adult ankylosaur could stand its ground even against a tyrannosaur, a reminder that power comes in many forms, not just in size. And then there were the ceratopsians, crowned with horns and frills, the last great herbivores of the Cretaceous. Triceratops is the name everyone knows, 3 horns, a massive frill, a face that looks both regal and defiant. But its relatives were just as fascinating, Styracosaurus with its crown of spikes, Pachyrhinosaurus with its thick, domed nose. Each evolved its own form of display and defense, a balance between survival and beauty. Their frills may have served many purposes: protection for the neck, heat regulation, or perhaps communication, a visual language of pattern and color. Some scientists believe they could blush, their frills flushing with blood during courtship or conflict. Imagine a herd of Triceratops moving across a Cretaceous plain, the ground trembling beneath them, their horns glinting in the sunlight, their calls echoing in deep, resonant tones. They were not mindless grazers but social, intelligent creatures, bound together by family and instinct. The herbivores of the Mesozoic were not passive victims of predation. They were survivors, builders, and sculptors of the land. Their feeding habits shaped entire ecosystems. As they moved, they pruned forests, spread seeds, and recycled nutrients. Their sheer bulk helped create open spaces where smaller plants could thrive. Even their footprints became microhabitats, filling with water after rain, nurturing insects and amphibians. The earth itself evolved around their presence. Their fossils remind us of scale, not just physical size, but the vastness of time and process. A sauropod's femur, taller than a person, is a monument to patience. Each bone represents millions of years of quiet adaptation, of trial and error, of persistence through changing climates and shifting continents. And yet, for all their immensity, their world was fragile. A change in temperature, a drought, a volcanic eruption, any of these could alter the delicate balance that sustained them. The giants may have ruled by mass, but even they were subject to the whims of an ever-changing planet. When you look at their bones today, it's easy to see them as relics of another world. But in truth, they are part of ours. The carbon that built their bodies still cycles through the atmosphere. The minerals in their bones seeped into the soil and rivers that nourish life today. In a way, the giants never truly left. Every mountain slope covered in pine, every grassland stretched beneath a wide sky, these are echoes of their footsteps. The earth still carries their weight in memory. The giants of the earth were not merely animals. They were living landscapes, walking, breathing continents that shaped everything around them. And though they are gone, the balance they maintained, the ecosystems they created, and the legacy they left behind continue in every living thing that draws breath. Their story is one of magnitude, not only of body, but of endurance. They remind us that greatness doesn't roar, sometimes, it simply walks slowly across the horizon, steady as the turning of the earth. For hundreds of millions of years, the earth's landscapes have been green without color, a world of ferns and conifers, cycads and ginkgos. The air smelled of sap and soil, but not of blossoms. The skies were filled with wings, but not with song. That changed in the Cretaceous. In a span of time so small that the planet might have blinked and missed it, two revolutions quietly began, one rooted in the ground, the other soaring into the air. The first came from the soil, the rise of flowering plants, the angiosperms. They began humbly, in the shadows of conifer forests and along the edges of rivers. At first glance, they looked unremarkable, small, simple leaves, perhaps a few delicate petals. But inside them was something new, something no plant before them had possessed. They had learned to partner with animals. Where the older gymnosperms cast their pollen into the wind, hoping it might land by chance, these new plants crafted strategies. They wrapped their seeds in fruit, their pollen in nectar, and their reproduction in seduction. They used color to call, scent to lure, sweetness to reward. Insects came first, ancient beetles, flies, and early bees, drawn by promise and taste. The plants offered them food, in return, the insects carried their pollen from flower to flower, stitching together an alliance that would change the earth forever. Each bloom became a conversation between two species, one rooted, one wandering. And as flowers spread, the world began to change color. Forests that had been a uniform green were suddenly dotted with yellow, red, and purple. Meadows became mosaics. The air filled with perfume. The insects multiplied, their bodies evolving to fit the shapes of blossoms. Long tongues, delicate wings, and patterns of flight evolved in response to petals and fragrance. It was a dance of mutual creation, millions of years in the making. The flowering plants, in turn, changed everything else. Their fruits fed small mammals, their seeds nourished birds, their roots stabilized new soils. The ecosystems of the late Cretaceous grew richer, more intricate, and more interwoven than ever before. And while the flowers bloomed below, a second transformation unfolded above, in the sky. From the forests, among the branches and underbrush, a new kind of creature had begun to rise. They were descendants of small, feathered dinosaurs, the raptors and their kin, who had found that their plumage, once meant for insulation and display, could do something more. It could lift them. Feathers had begun as protection, hollow shafts that trapped air and warmth. Over time, they grew longer, stiffer, layered. Some dinosaurs used them to attract mates, flashing colors or patterns, others used them for shade or camouflage. Then came movement, running, leaping, gliding. A flap to stabilize. A glide to descend. A controlled fall that became, slowly, flight. By the late Jurassic, that experiment had become reality. Archaeopteryx, the first known bird, lived among cycads and conifers more than 150 million years ago. It was small, roughly the size of a raven, and it carried within its body the story of transformation itself. Its wings bore true feathers, asymmetrical and aerodynamic, capable of catching air. Its tail was long and bony like a reptile's, but it fanned with plumes that helped it steer. Its jaws were filled with small teeth, and its fingers ended in claws. It was halfway between two worlds, a dinosaur that had learned to fly. We know it not from imagination, but from stone. Fossils of Archaeopteryx found in the limestone of Germany preserve every feather in exquisite detail, as if time itself paused for a moment to admire it. It glided from branch to branch, perhaps chasing insects or escaping predators, its calls echoing softly through Jurassic air. And from that fragile beginning came the birds, a lineage that would outlive almost every other of the Mesozoic world. During the Cretaceous, their diversity exploded. Some grew long tails and toothy beaks, others shortened their tails and developed stronger wings. They nested in trees, laid eggs in hidden hollows, and learned to migrate with the seasons. Their bones grew lighter, their feathers more specialized. Some birds began to lose their teeth entirely, evolving beaks for seed cracking or fishing. Others developed powerful breast muscles that let them flap harder and longer. The sky, once ruled solely by pterosaurs, now filled with new voices, chirps, whistles, and the soft flutter of feathers. And below them, the flowering plants gave them reason to stay. With flowers came fruit. With fruit came abundance. Birds fed on berries and seeds, spreading them far and wide. The plants rewarded their service with sweetness and color. Together, they remade the world into one of diversity and beauty. This partnership, between plant and bird, became one of the most enduring relationships in the history of life. It's easy to think of evolution as a chain, one form leading neatly to another, but it's more like a web, a vast tangle of connections and exchanges. The birth of flowers and the birth of birds were not separate miracles. They were threads woven through the same moment in time, each shaping the other. Birds carried seeds across continents. Flowers fed their flight. Both filled the world with color. As the Cretaceous continued, these transformations reached their peak. The earth was alive with color and sound. Insects buzzed from bloom to bloom. Birds darted between branches, their feathers catching the light. Even the great dinosaurs wandered through meadows speckled with flowers, perhaps unaware that they walked through the beginnings of a new age. And in the background, the old giants, the cycads, the conifers, the ancient plants of earlier worlds, still stood, watching, unchanged, their roots deep in time. They had seen extinctions and rebirths, continents split and merge, climates rise and fall. Now they watched as new forms, delicate, fragile, yet persistent, began to claim the earth. It's strange to think that the final chapter of the dinosaurs' age was also the dawn of much of what we now know. The plants that feed us, the birds that fill our mornings with song, all began here, in the shadow of creatures we can scarcely imagine. The world of the late Mesozoic was a place of contrast, titans on the ground, blossoms in the fields, and feathered beings in the sky. Life had learned every direction, to grow, to swim, to fly, to bloom. And yet, beneath all that beauty, the earth was shifting again. Volcanoes smoldered, climates wavered, seas rose and fell. The balance that had held for millions of years was beginning to strain. The flowering world was young, but already it was destined to inherit a planet on the brink of change. When we walk through a garden today or hear the rustle of a bird's wings above us, we are hearing faint echoes of that time, the whispers of an age when life reinvented itself, one petal and one feather at a time. They remind us that the greatest revolutions are often the quietest. Not in thunder or flame, but in the soft bloom of color and the slow lift of a wing. If the story of life during the Mesozoic was one of adaptation, the story of the earth itself was one of movement. The ground beneath those ancient forests and oceans was not still, it was restless, drifting, cracking, and colliding, as if the planet itself were breathing in geological time. When we picture the Mesozoic, we often imagine a single image, dinosaurs moving across lush green plains or reptiles gliding through clear seas. But that picture would never have stayed the same for long. The earth was constantly reshaping itself. Its continents wandered like immense ships upon the molten sea of the mantle below, carried slowly but inexorably by plate tectonics. At the dawn of the Mesozoic, around 252 million years ago, all land was joined together in one vast supercontinent, Pangaea. It stretched nearly from pole to pole, an enormous landmass surrounded by the endless expanse of a single global ocean known as Panthalassa. From above, Pangaea would have looked almost otherworldly, a sprawling brown and green continent with a faint scar of desert running down its center, framed by pale coasts where the ocean lapped in shimmering silence. But even then, the seams were already beginning to strain. Deep beneath the crust, magma moved, pushing against the surface, heating, expanding, and fracturing the land. Volcanoes erupted along fault lines. Rifts opened like slow-moving wounds. The supercontinent, ancient and proud, began to split apart. This was the birth of separation, a process that would take more than 100 million years, reshaping the face of the world forever. The first cracks appeared during the late Triassic. They stretched across what would one day become the Atlantic Ocean, pulling Africa and North America apart. Rivers widened into lakes, lakes into seas. Over millions of years, those rifts filled with salt and sediment, their scars preserved in the rocks we can still touch today. By the Jurassic, Pangaea had fully begun to divide into two massive daughter continents, Laurasia in the north and Gondwana in the south. Between them, the first waters of the Atlantic shimmered like a newborn vein of blue. The world grew wetter and greener. As continents drifted, climates diversified. Deserts gave way to forests, and coastlines teemed with new life. Species that had once mingled across a single landmass were now isolated by oceans, evolving along different paths. This slow separation became one of the great engines of evolution. In North America, new species of dinosaurs began to emerge, distinct from those in Europe and Asia. In the southern lands of Gondwana, which would one day become South America, Africa, Antarctica, Australia, and India, life followed its own unique course. Isolation bred innovation. The Earth was not only changing physically, but biologically. Imagine the world during the mid-Jurassic, the continents already beginning to drift into shapes faintly recognizable today. North America was moving westward, its vast plains rising slowly into mountains that would one day form the early foundations of the Rockies. Africa was sliding east, its deserts giving way to lush equatorial forests. India, still part of Gondwana, had begun its long, lonely voyage northward, a journey that would eventually carry it across the ancient seas to collide with Asia and raise the mighty Himalayas. But that collision was still far in the future. In the meantime, the Earth was alive with volcanic energy. As the continents tore apart, the planet bled heat. New oceans opened, their floors lined with spreading ridges where molten rock rose from the deep to create new crust. Volcanoes dotted coastlines, belching ash and steam into the air. Lava flowed into lowlands, cooling into dark, glassy stone. The world was in flux, a mosaic of transformation. And the effects reached far beyond geology. Volcanic eruptions released vast amounts of carbon dioxide, warming the planet. The climate of the Jurassic was one of greenhouse heat, humid, tropical, and lush. The poles were free of ice, and forests stretched almost to the Arctic Circle. The earth breathed heavily, wrapped in warmth. Rainfall increased, feeding rivers and swamps. Seas rose and flooded the continents, creating shallow inland oceans where life flourished. Coral reefs, clam beds, and ammonite fields spread across continental shelves. In this ever-changing landscape, creatures evolved to meet new challenges. Dinosaurs that had once roamed across Pangaea now found themselves divided by barriers of water. Some adapted to coastal life, others retreated inland. Flight evolved again and again, among pterosaurs, early birds, and insects, as travel between fragmented lands became increasingly valuable. Every division of land created new beginnings. By the Cretaceous, around 145 million years ago, the world had taken on a form we might almost recognize. The Atlantic Ocean had widened, its deep currents beginning to shape weather patterns. South America had drifted far from Africa, Australia from Antarctica. The continents of Laurasia and Gondwana continued their slow dance, twisting, colliding, and breaking apart. The Earth's surface resembled a giant puzzle mid-assembly, pieces drifting but not yet locked into their modern places. And with this movement came instability. Volcanoes continued to reshape coastlines, releasing gases that thickened the greenhouse atmosphere. Sea levels rose to their highest point in Earth's history, more than 200 meters higher than today. Large parts of the continents were submerged beneath shallow seas, warm and full of life. In North America, the western interior seaway split the continent in two, creating a vast inland ocean that stretched from the Arctic to the Gulf of Mexico. Along its coasts, herds of dinosaurs grazed while marine reptiles ruled the waters beside them. The continents that would one day host grasslands and cities were then archipelagos, scattered islands where isolation once again drove evolution into dazzling diversity. But for all its beauty, the Mesozoic world was also volatile. The same forces that gave it life could just as easily take it away. When volcanoes erupted in massive, sustained events, such as those that formed the Deccan Traps in what is now India, they darkened skies for years, poured carbon and sulfur into the atmosphere, and disrupted the climate. Periods of intense warming were often followed by cooling, drought, or acid rain. Life endured, but the planet never stopped changing. The shifting continents also altered the pathways of ocean currents. Warm water circulated differently, changing global weather patterns. Some regions became wetter, others, arid. Deserts formed where forests had been, new forests grew where once there were seas. The dinosaurs, the plants, the seas, all adjusted in a slow dance of adaptation. If you could watch the continents move in time-lapse, millions of years compressed into minutes, it would look like slow breathing. Continents would drift apart, pause, and then collide. Mountains would rise like wrinkles in the Earth's skin, only to erode and fade again. The oceans would fill and empty, coastlines appearing and vanishing like shifting tides. It is humbling to realize that everything we know, every landscape, every climate, every ecosystem, exists only for a moment in that eternal movement. The world of the Mesozoic was beautiful, but it was not fixed. It was always becoming. And it still is. The continents continue their journey today, moving just a few centimeters each year, the same pace they traveled in the Mesozoic. The Atlantic still widens. The Pacific still shrinks. Mountains still rise where plates collide. We live on the same restless earth that carried the dinosaurs, the same drifting crust that bore the weight of giants. The difference is only time. When you look at a map, you are looking at a single frame in an endless film, one scene in a story that began long before us and will continue long after. The Mesozoic was a chapter of transformation, a time when the earth itself seemed alive. It shaped the creatures who lived upon it, just as they, in turn, shaped the land. And in the faint tremor of the planet beneath our feet, in the distant rumble of a mountain forming or a volcano stirring, that same story still continues. The continents never sleep. Every age believes itself eternal. The forests bloom, the seas shimmer, the creatures live and die beneath warm skies, and time seems endless. But nothing on earth lasts forever, not even the most magnificent of worlds. The late Cretaceous was a time of brilliance, the final golden chapter of the Mesozoic. Life had reached its full, intricate complexity. The continents were alive with movement and color. Dinosaurs roamed in every size and form imaginable. Flowers painted the fields, birds filled the air with song. It was a flourishing, not a decline. And that is what makes its ending so tragic. The world was not dying, not yet. It was thriving, unaware that its clock was already winding down. The Cretaceous Earth was warm, lush, and dynamic. Sea levels were higher than ever before, and shallow oceans covered much of the continents. The western interior seaway split North America in two, forming rich coastal plains on either side. In these lands, herds of hadrosaurs grazed, triceratops browsed, and Tyrannosaurus rex prowled the floodplains like living thunder. Forests of conifers, magnolias, and early oaks stretched from horizon to horizon. Flowers bloomed among ferns, and insects filled the air. The poles were free of ice, covered instead with forests that basked in long summer light. But beneath the beauty, there were signs of strain. The Earth's crust had never stopped moving, and deep below the surface, pressure was building. In what would one day be India, volcanic fissures opened in the ground, spewing rivers of molten rock. This was the birth of the Deccan Traps, one of the largest volcanic events in the history of the planet. For thousands of years at a time, eruptions shook the land. Lava poured across vast plains, sometimes covering areas larger than entire countries. Gases, carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and methane, filled the air, turning skies red and hazy. Ash drifted across oceans. The world grew hotter, then colder, then hotter again, as the atmosphere struggled to find balance. For most life, the changes were slow enough to endure. Evolution adjusts by inches, not leaps. But the balance was weakening. Seasons grew unpredictable. Drought struck where there had been rain, floods where there had been dry ground. Food chains strained. Coral reefs suffered as oceans grew acidic. Some species vanished quietly, their names lost before they were ever written in stone. Yet still, life persisted. The dinosaurs continued to rule, adapting even as their world shifted. The hadrosaurs, or duck-billed dinosaurs, developed elaborate crests on their heads, resonating chambers that allowed them to call across great distances, to communicate in the dense, humid air. The ceratopsians, Triceratops, Torosaurus, and others, grew larger and more diverse. Their herds roamed the coasts and river valleys, grazing endlessly beneath the gaze of predators. The predators themselves, Tyrannosaurus rex in North America, Tarbosaurus in Asia, Abelisaurus in the southern continents, were at their peak. Each continent had its ruler, each ecosystem its balance. It was a world of power and abundance, a world so alive that extinction seemed impossible. But the earth had already begun to turn against them. Volcanic winters followed volcanic summers. The chemical makeup of the oceans began to shift. Carbon levels spiked, trapping heat. Sulfur cooled the skies. Each eruption of the Deccan traps released not only fire, but also ash that dimmed the sunlight. In some years, temperatures dropped, in others, they soared. The climate became a pendulum, swinging faster and faster. The planet was entering an age of instability, a long night that began not with impact, but with imbalance. In the seas, the signs were even clearer. Plankton populations, the foundation of marine food chains, began to decline. Their shells grew thinner as ocean acidification increased. Coral reefs, already stressed by warming waters, struggled to survive. Ammonites, once abundant, began to dwindle. The great marine reptiles, the mosasaurs and plesiosaurs, still dominated the oceans, but even they were affected. Their prey became harder to find. Some species disappeared entirely. The ecosystems that had sustained them for millions of years began to fracture. And all the while, deep in space, a new threat was approaching, unseen, unimaginable, but inevitable. A fragment of rock and metal, drifting through the void, carried on a trajectory that would one day intersect the orbit of the Earth. It had wandered the solar system for millions of years, indifferent and invisible, until gravity drew it into a fatal path. But that moment was still in the future. For now, the dinosaurs walked beneath a sky that glowed faintly red from volcanic haze, their world still vibrant, their herds still moving, their predators still hunting. The Earth felt alive, but restless. Geological records show fluctuations in temperature, in sea levels, in carbon balance. Ecosystems shifted, populations moved. Forests that once grew along warm coasts began to retreat inland. Wetlands dried. Species migrated, following the climates that could still sustain them. It was as if the planet was holding its breath. The Cretaceous had begun with abundance, wide seas, lush forests, diversity beyond imagining, and now it seemed to be faltering under its own weight. And yet, even in its final moments, the age created new wonders. The last of the dinosaurs were among the most advanced and specialized of all. Their brains were larger, their senses sharper, their behaviors more complex. The small, feathered dinosaurs that would give rise to modern birds had already mastered the skies. Mammals, too, were evolving quietly, still small, but clever and adaptable, waiting in the shadows for an age to come. It's strange to imagine that in the very moment before catastrophe, life was flourishing. But that is often how endings come, not with slow decay, but at the height of beauty. Somewhere in a Cretaceous forest, a mother Triceratops guards her nest as dawn breaks through the mist. In the distance, a Tyrannosaurus moves along the riverbank, its silhouette fading in the morning haze. Birds call from flowering branches. Insects hum in the warm air. The planet seems eternal. No one, not even the Earth itself, could sense that within a heartbeat of geological time, everything would change. The Mesozoic had survived fire, flood, and the shattering of continents. It had endured for more than 180 million years. But all ages end, and the signs were gathering. The world was becoming fragile, stretched thin between heat and cold, between light and shadow. The long night was already beginning, not in silence, but in the quiet, persistent rumble of the earth, and the distant echo of something hurtling through space. And when that night finally fell, it would sweep away almost everything that had lived beneath those golden skies. But it would also make way for what came next. There are moments in Earth's history when time itself seems to stop, when the slow rhythm of geology gives way to something sudden, violent, and absolute. One such moment came 66 million years ago. It began as any other day. The Cretaceous world still thrived beneath warm skies. Herds of triceratops moved across coastal plains, grazing among flowering plants. Tyrannosaurus rex hunted in the heat of the afternoon, its shadow stretching across the shimmering wetlands. Birds called from the trees. Insects buzzed. The sea breeze carried the scent of pine and salt. The earth seemed timeless, ancient and enduring. But far above, unseen and silent, a mountain of stone was falling. It was an asteroid, roughly 10 kilometers across, a wandering relic of the early solar system, older than Earth itself. For millions of years it had drifted through the void, a fragment of cosmic debris locked in the sun's pull. Then, by chance or gravity, its orbit shifted, placing it on a collision course with our planet. As it entered Earth's atmosphere, it moved faster than any bullet, more than 70,000 kilometers per hour. The air in front of it compressed into plasma. The sky blazed white. Shadows disappeared. For a brief instant, the asteroid shone brighter than the sun. Then it struck. The impact occurred in what is now the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, near the modern town of Chicxulub. In that single instant, the Mesozoic world ended. The energy released was beyond comprehension, more than 1 billion times greater than the bombs that scarred the 20th century. The ground vaporized. Oceans boiled. The crust itself shuddered like glass struck by a hammer. A fireball rose into the heavens, followed by a shockwave that circled the globe. Forests thousands of kilometers away ignited. Winds stronger than hurricanes scoured the land. Mountains shook. Where the asteroid struck, it carved a crater more than 180 kilometers wide and 20 kilometers deep, a wound in the planet that remains to this day, buried beneath rock and jungle. Within minutes, tsunamis raced across the seas, waves hundreds of meters high slamming into coastlines, drowning forests, tearing apart coral reefs. The sky filled with molten rock and vaporized dust. Pebbles and ash rained down for hours, for days. Every place beneath that darkened sky became a furnace. Then came the fire. As the debris fell back through the atmosphere, it ignited the air itself. Across continents, flames spread in waves, consuming forests, grasslands, and every living thing in their path. The heat was global, the surface of the planet briefly as hot as an oven. Animals fled, but there was nowhere to go. In the seas, creatures perished as acid rain fell from the skies, poisoning the water. On land, the fires devoured the oxygen. Even far from the impact, where the shockwave could no longer be felt, the earth was burning. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the fire ended. The world fell silent. The skies turned black. The dust and soot from the impact, billions of tons of it, rose into the upper atmosphere, where it blocked out the sun. For weeks, then months, sunlight could not reach the ground. The warmth of the Cretaceous vanished almost overnight. Photosynthesis stopped. Plants withered. Flowers folded in darkness. The air grew cold. The temperature dropped sharply, perhaps by more than 20 degrees. The world that had been tropical and vibrant became a twilight of freezing winds and drifting ash. This was the impact winter, a global night that lasted for years. The oceans cooled and stagnated. Plankton died, followed by fish, followed by the great reptiles that had hunted them. On land, the chains of life collapsed one by one. The herbivores starved first, followed by the predators. Even the scavengers found nothing left to eat. Of all the large animals on Earth, almost none survived. The great dinosaurs, the rulers of the Mesozoic, vanished. The Tyrannosaurus, Triceratops, Ankylosaurus, and the countless others that had filled the world with sound and movement, gone. 3/4 of all species on Earth perished in the span of a few decades. The skies that had once echoed with the calls of pterosaurs fell silent. The seas that had shimmered with mosasaurs turned to cold emptiness. Forests that had stretched from pole to pole became graveyards of ash. It was one of the darkest moments in the history of life, a silence so deep it seemed eternal. And yet, not all was lost. Beneath the ashes, in burrows and riverbanks, in the hidden corners of forests and shorelines, life endured. Small creatures, the ones that could dig, hide, or hibernate, survived. Some birds, descendants of small feathered dinosaurs, made it through. Tiny mammals, no larger than rats, emerged from the earth when the skies finally began to clear. They had survived the fire and the cold by being what the giants were not, small, adaptable, and patient. The sunlight returned slowly. First a dim glow, then a pale dawn. The world was gray and silent, littered with the bones of an age that would never return. But from that silence came renewal. Seeds that had lain dormant in the ash began to sprout. Ferns, the first plants to recover, spread across the burned landscapes, green returning like hope. In time, flowers followed. Rivers ran clear again. The air warmed. The world healed itself. The Mesozoic was over, but life, as it always does, found a way. It's impossible to imagine the grief of that extinction, but it was not the end of Earth's story. It was a transformation. The age of dinosaurs gave way to the age of mammals, and eventually, to us. We are children of that same event, descendants of the survivors who clung to life in the dark. Every breath we take, every sunrise we see, comes from the resilience born in that long night. The crater at Chicxulub remains, hidden beneath layers of limestone and jungle, a silent monument to the day the sky fell. Its edges are softened by time, but its story endures, written in stone, in fossils, in the very shape of life as we know it. When we look at the stars now, it is tempting to think of them as distant and harmless, beautiful points of light. But they remind us that our world is not isolated. We are part of a universe that creates and destroys, endlessly, without malice or mercy. The impact that ended the dinosaurs was a tragedy, but also a beginning. From the ashes of that cataclysm rose new forests, new creatures, new songs. The earth turned once more toward the light. The long night had passed. And the whispers of what came next, of rebirth, of adaptation, of a world forever changed, were already stirring beneath the surface. The silence after the storm was almost sacred. The fires were gone, the skies had cleared, and the earth, wounded, blackened, but still turning, began to breathe once more. From the ashes of destruction, a new age began. It was not sudden. The first years after the impact were fragile, uncertain. The air still smelled faintly of sulfur, the oceans were clouded with dust. Yet, in every corner of the planet, something remarkable was happening. Life, faint, stubborn, resilient, was returning. The world that rose from the ashes of the Cretaceous was different from the one that had fallen. The dinosaurs were gone, their bones cooling beneath the soil. The seas were empty of the great reptiles that had ruled them. The skies, once filled with the beating wings of pterosaurs, were quiet except for the flutter of a few surviving birds. But the earth had not died, it had reset. The great extinction that ended the Mesozoic was not the end of life, but a rebalancing. It cleared the board, wiping away the dominance of the giants and opening space for something smaller, swifter, and endlessly adaptable. The survivors were creatures of endurance. Small mammals that had once lived in shadows, creatures no bigger than rabbits or mice, now found a world of opportunity. They had survived by being overlooked, burrowers that hid from heat and cold, omnivores that could eat roots, seeds, insects, or carrion. Now, with the giants gone, they inherited the earth. The first years were harsh. Temperatures fluctuated wildly. Rain fell in strange patterns. Forests took centuries to regrow. But nature is patient. In time, green returned. The earliest plants to reclaim the land were ferns, spreading quickly across the barren ground. Paleobotanists call this the fern spike, a signal in the fossil record that marks the world's first wave of recovery. Ferns are pioneers, they grow where others cannot. Their spores drifted on the wind, sprouting across ashen rock, stitching the soil back together. Then came the hardwoods, willows, oaks, and palms. The forests thickened. Rain returned. Rivers carved new valleys through the layers of ash. The world grew soft again, humid and green. And with the forests came the animals. Mammals that had survived underground began to explore the new wilderness. They were not all the same. Some were insect eaters, darting through leaf litter, others were scavengers or climbers. A few began to grow larger, adapting to the open spaces left behind. These early mammals were nothing like the creatures we know today, yet within them lay all the potential of what would come. In the fossil beds of what is now North America and Europe, we find the remains of tiny primates, creatures like Purgatorius, climbing through the branches of newly reborn forests. In the southern continents, other mammals, the ancestors of marsupials and placentals, diversified rapidly, filling the roles once held by dinosaurs. It was an age of experimentation. Evolution, given freedom after catastrophe, began to paint in broad strokes again. The seas, too, were changing. The great marine reptiles were gone, but the oceans did not stay empty for long. Sharks, which had survived the extinction with little loss, became the new rulers of the deep. Bony fish diversified rapidly. Within a few million years, the waters teemed again with life, smaller, faster, and better suited to the new conditions. Plankton populations recovered, restoring the base of the food chain. Coral reefs began to grow again, pale and tentative at first, then brighter as the centuries passed. The age of mammals, or more precisely, the Cenozoic Era, had begun. But in these first chapters, known as the Paleogene, the Earth still bore the scars of its loss. The continents had drifted into positions that looked increasingly familiar. North America and Eurasia were separating from one another. Africa was beginning its slow collision with Europe. India was still racing north, toward its future union with Asia. Climate, too, was in transition. The atmosphere, heavy with carbon dioxide from the Deccan eruptions and the fires that followed, began to stabilize. The Earth warmed again, though not to the extreme heat of the Cretaceous. Rainforests spread across the tropics, temperate forests flourished near the poles. The poles themselves, once covered in coniferous woods, basked under long, warm summers. There were no ice caps yet, only forests stretching beneath the midnight sun. In these forests, life evolved quickly. Small mammals gave rise to new lineages, hoofed grazers, primates, predators. Their evolution was not a march, but a rush, an explosion of diversity filling the void left by the giants. Among them, one of the most successful groups to emerge were the ungulates, early hoofed mammals that would one day give rise to horses, elephants, and deer. At first, they were small and nimble, running through undergrowth and feeding on soft leaves. But as grasslands appeared millions of years later, they would evolve into the great herds that shaped the modern Earth. The skies also began to fill again. The surviving birds, descended from small feathered theropods, diversified rapidly. Without the pterosaurs to compete with, they took to every niche, soaring over coasts, diving into rivers, wading through wetlands. Some grew large again, like the ancient terror birds of South America, which became the new apex predators of the land. Each ecosystem that had once belonged to dinosaurs now found new masters. But though life had returned, it was quieter. The Mesozoic had been an age of thunder, massive bodies, colossal roars, a world of heat and noise. The early Cenozoic was softer, filled with chirps, rustles, and wind through leaves. The earth was relearning balance. The fossils from this time show not grandeur, but abundance, countless small forms, multiplying, experimenting, thriving. It was a symphony played not by giants, but by survivors. And with the passing of every million years, the world grew more familiar. In the swamps of what is now Wyoming, palm trees shaded strange mammals, some resembling oversized lemurs, others early horses no bigger than foxes. Crocodiles still lurked in rivers, unchanged, as if they had simply waited out the extinction. Turtles basked on mud banks. The forests buzzed with new species of bees and butterflies, their wings colored by the same flowers that had survived from the Cretaceous. It was a world rebuilt, piece by piece, from memory. The earth itself seemed gentler, though its restlessness never ended. Volcanoes still burned, mountains still rose. But for now, life flourished under a warmer, calmer sky. It is easy to think of the extinction as an ending, but in truth, it was a beginning written in the language of loss. Without it, mammals might never have risen. Birds might never have filled the sky. The forests and fields we know today might never have existed. Destruction and creation, the twin forces that drive our planet, had turned once more. In every fern that reclaimed the ground, in every creature that emerged from hiding, the earth was whispering a truth as old as time. Life always returns. And in its return, it creates something new, something unexpected. The Cenozoic world was smaller, quieter, and yet more intricate than the one before it. Its rhythms were subtler, its stories closer to our own. The Mesozoic had been an age of giants, this would be an age of possibility. The long night had passed. The first light of a new dawn spread across the horizon. And as the earth warmed again, the seeds of the future, the roots of our own story, began to grow. The dawn after destruction had passed. The world, still tender from its rebirth, was now alive with movement again. The forests rustled with new sounds, not the heavy footfalls of titans, but the light scurry of paws, the soft flutter of wings, the call of birds over rivers that shimmered in the sun. The Mesozoic had ended in fire and silence, but from that silence, a new chorus began, the song of mammals. They were not new to the world. Mammals had lived in the shadows for more than 100 million years, sharing the earth with dinosaurs long before the end came. But during that age, they were small, secretive, and few. They hid in burrows and treetops, awake at night, their lives measured in heartbeats and whispers. Now, with the giants gone, they stepped into the light. It began quietly, a slow unfolding. For millions of years, mammals had been waiting for their chance. When the asteroid struck and the world reset, they were ready. The traits that once made them survivors, intelligence, warmth, care for their young, now became their greatest strengths. In the early Paleogene, the world was theirs for the taking. Forests stretched across the continents, and the climate was warm, humid, and forgiving. Every environment was open to exploration, the ground, the trees, the rivers, even the air. And so they began to evolve. The first to flourish were the placental mammals, whose young developed within the mother's body, protected, nurtured, and born ready to survive. This innovation gave them a tremendous advantage. They spread across the land like a quiet tide, filling every empty niche. Among them were the ancestors of creatures we know today. Tiny, shrew-like insectivores scurried through leaf litter, hunting beetles and worms. Some took to the trees, becoming the first primates, agile and curious, with grasping hands and forward-facing eyes. Others grew larger, their teeth adapting for new diets, leaves, fruits, or even flesh. Evolution, freed from old limits, began to play again. In time, new forms appeared, creatures unlike anything the earth had seen. The first ungulates, or hoofed mammals, took to the open plains. Some, like the early horses of North America, were no bigger than foxes. They grazed on soft plants beneath the shade of palms. Others became browsers of leaves and fruit, wandering the forests in small herds. In the swamps, semi-aquatic mammals began to evolve, distant ancestors of creatures that would one day return fully to the sea. They hunted along riverbanks, their bodies adapting for swimming, their nostrils moving higher on their heads. In time, they would become whales. Each adaptation was an answer to opportunity. The earth had opened itself, and life was quick to fill it. Predators evolved, too. In the absence of dinosaurs, new hunters arose, small at first, but fierce. Early carnivorous mammals like Mesozoic, the ancestor of modern cats, dogs, and bears, stalked the forests. They were agile, intelligent, and efficient, relying not on brute force but on stealth and cooperation. The balance of predator and prey, the eternal dance of life, began again, rewritten in fur and claw instead of scale and tooth. As the Eocene epoch dawned, around 56 million years ago, the Earth entered a time of extraordinary warmth and fertility. This was one of the hottest periods since the Age of Dinosaurs, a greenhouse world where tropical forests reached almost to the poles. Palms grew in Alaska. Crocodiles basked in what would one day be Canada. The air was thick with moisture, and life thrived in every direction. In these lush forests, primates diversified. They lived in social groups, swinging through the canopy, communicating through calls and gestures. Their brains grew larger, their eyes more expressive. They were beginning to think in ways no creature before them ever had. Meanwhile, in the oceans, something magnificent was unfolding. From small, land-dwelling ancestors resembling wolves, the first whales began their transformation. Over millions of years, their legs shortened, their bodies elongated, and their nostrils migrated to the tops of their heads. Species like Ambulocetus, the walking whale, could still move on land but swam with powerful strokes of its tail. Later forms, like Basilosaurus, grew enormous, fully aquatic, with streamlined bodies and paddle-like limbs. The seas that had once belonged to mosasaurs and ichthyosaurs now had new masters, warm-blooded, air-breathing mammals that sang to one another across the depths. It was a poetic symmetry, life that had fled the sea to escape the chaos of the past now returning to it, evolved and reimagined. Back on land, diversity exploded. The early elephants, known as Moratherium, appeared in the swamps of Africa, small, pig-sized creatures with short trunks, feeding on aquatic plants. From these humble beginnings would rise the great tusked giants of the later world. Rhinoceroses, tapirs, and horses shared the plains. Some evolved massive horns for defense, others long legs for speed. Forests echoed with the sounds of creatures calling, moving, and competing for space. And above them, the birds, descendants of the small, feathered survivors of the impact, filled the skies again. Some grew into towering, flightless hunters, the terror birds of South America, swift and deadly, striking with beaks like spears. Others became the graceful flyers we know today, mastering migration and song. The world had become vibrant once more, complex, balanced, alive. But beneath that beauty, the earth was shifting again. The continents continued their slow drift, colliding and reshaping the face of the planet. India, after millions of years of northward travel, finally met Asia, and the Himalayas began to rise, the greatest mountain range the earth has ever known. Their formation changed everything. The new mountains altered wind patterns, captured monsoons, and cooled the global climate. Slowly, the greenhouse world began to fade. By the Oligocene epoch, around 34 million years ago, the poles began to cool. Ice appeared in Antarctica for the first time in millions of years. Forests retreated toward the equator. Grasslands began to spread. This change reshaped evolution once again. Animals that had thrived in dense forests adapted to open plains. Vision improved, limbs lengthened, and speed became a survival tool. Herds formed, not of dinosaurs, but of mammals. Horses, antelope-like creatures, and early elephants roamed together, grazing beneath vast skies. Predators evolved to match them, faster, leaner, more cooperative. Packs of early dogs and cats learned to hunt in groups, chasing prey across endless grasslands. The age of giants was gone, but a new kind of majesty had taken its place. The rise of the mammals was not a single event, it was a symphony unfolding over millions of years, each note shaped by adaptation and chance. From burrows and branches came the rulers of forests, plains, and seas. From tiny ancestors rose elephants, whales, and primates. And among the primates, small, clever, social, a new kind of awareness was beginning to flicker. They watched the world differently. They learned, remembered, and passed knowledge to their young. Evolution was not only changing their bodies, it was shaping their minds. The earth, too, was changing with them. The climate cooled further, shaping the landscapes we recognize today, open savannas, mountain ranges, deserts, and oceans teeming with new life. The story that began in the ashes of extinction had become one of renewal and transformation. Life had not simply returned, it had evolved into something entirely new. The Mesozoic was a world of survival through strength. The Cenozoic, this new age, would be a world of survival through intelligence, adaptability, and connection. And somewhere in the forests of Africa, unnoticed by the rest of creation, small primates were beginning to stand a little taller, look a little farther, and think a little deeper. The story of the earth was about to take another turn, one that would eventually lead to us. The world we know today, the forests, the fields, the oceans that shimmer in sunlight, is built on the bones of what came before. Every mountain, every breeze, every breath carries the memory of an age long vanished, when giants walked and the earth was young. The Mesozoic is gone, but it is not lost. Its story still lives beneath our feet and within us. The continents have drifted far from where they once were, but their movements still follow the same rhythm that began when Pangaea first broke apart. The oceans are different, yet they breathe in tides shaped by the same gravity that once pulled on Cretaceous shores. Even the air we breathe carries molecules that passed through the lungs of dinosaurs, through the leaves of ancient forests, through the fires of extinction and rebirth. The earth remembers, not in words, but in pattern and persistence. Every fossil is a syllable in its memory. Every layer of rock is a page. And when we study them, we are not just learning about the past, we are listening to the planet tell its own story. That story is not simply one of survival, but of transformation. The Mesozoic world was a masterpiece of balance, lush, wild, and magnificent. Its fall was not failure, but change, making way for something new. Life did not end with the dinosaurs, it evolved, adapted, and continued. From their lineage came the birds, living descendants of the Sky Kings, still soaring through sunlight, still singing across the wind. When you hear a bird's call in the morning, you are hearing the voice of the Mesozoic, the same ancient bloodline that once filled the air with the beating of wings. The forests, too, carry echoes of that world. Many of the trees that shade our cities, oaks, magnolias, and ginkgos, trace their ancestry to that era. Their roots reach not only into the soil, but into time. When their leaves rustle, they whisper the same songs that once drifted over the backs of sauropods and the nests of raptors. Even the stones remember. Walk through a desert and pick up a piece of sandstone, you may be holding the compressed remains of an ancient dune where dinosaurs once walked. Stand on a mountain ridge and you may be standing on what was once the floor of a Jurassic sea. The world has changed beyond recognition, but it has never truly forgotten. The Mesozoic's legacy also lives in us. Our bones are shaped by the same physics that built theirs, by gravity, balance, and need. The mammalian body, with its warmth and care, is the child of that long struggle through extinction. We carry within our genes the resilience that allowed our ancestors to survive the fire and the cold, to rise again when the world seemed lost. We are, in a very real sense, the last echo of that age. And yet, we are also its witnesses, creatures who can look back and understand, who can see in a stone or a feather the miracle of time. When you walk through a forest and feel the earth tremble slightly beneath your step, that vibration travels into layers of soil and stone that remember other footsteps, heavier, older, now turned to dust. The earth has always been alive, even when we did not yet exist to see it. It has shaped us, and it continues to. In the rise and fall of mountains, in the flow of rivers, in the slow drift of continents, we can still see the same processes that molded the Mesozoic world. We live inside that same, ancient system, not apart from it, but as part of its ongoing story. And now, for the first time in the planet's long history, one species, ours, holds the power to alter that story. We have become, in a sense, the new geological force. We move mountains, reroute rivers, change the chemistry of the air. We build and destroy, create and consume, as if time itself were ours to command. But the earth endures. It has seen cataclysm and rebirth. It has watched life vanish and return. It knows patience that we cannot comprehend. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson the Mesozoic offers us. That nothing lasts forever, and that everything can begin again. The dinosaurs ruled for more than 160 million years, and yet they, too, passed. The forests that once covered the poles turned to stone, the oceans shifted, the stars themselves moved in the sky. And still, life found a way to continue. The same cycles that ended their age continue to shape ours, slow, immense, and unstoppable. If the story of Earth has a voice, it speaks not in words but in rhythm, in tides, in seasons, in the slow heartbeat of change. It tells us that endings are never final. They are transformations, turning one kind of beauty into another. We are not separate from that rhythm. We are part of it. Our civilization, our cities, our dreams, all rest upon the bones of ancient worlds. Every fossilized feather, every footprint in stone, every grain of sand was once alive, once moving beneath the same sun we know today. The distance between then and now is vast, but the connection is unbroken. The earth remembers everything. The fall of meteors. The rise of mountains. The first breath of life. The last call of a dying species. It carries all of it in silence, waiting for us to listen. And when we do, when we stop and truly hear, we realize that the story of the dinosaurs, of the Mesozoic, of all that has come and gone, is also the story of us. The same courage, the same fragility, the same will to endure. So when you hear the wind moving through the trees, or watch the surf roll across a beach, remember this. You are listening to the whispers of Earth. The same whispers that spoke through fire and stone, through feather and scale, through ages of darkness and light. The Mesozoic may have ended in silence, but its song never stopped. It continues, in the wings of birds, in the pulse of oceans, in the echo of your own heartbeat. And as long as the earth turns, it will go on singing.